There's so many faces in the game. I'm sure I introduced myself to you. He's like, hi. Hi. A little bit. But in my closet, I can say mistakes. Some complex issue.
Yeah, maybe compare the election.
So you're gonna go with should the gentleman?
I think I will know. I don't like to.
I'm sure they have HQ there.
Yeah.
So they'll get the correspondence from there.
park there. You know, when you go right now, I park there and go from there.
So I went
Like, in the middle. But it's cool to do it for 5 minutes. I think there is space for beginners and there. In 6 years ago, I didn't really do Chicago for years. And a year I was from Korea and then Korea. It's like so sad. No, I only for fiction. I'm from Korea, I moved 6 years ago. I work on a private she said, well, I got here. Most of the time I watch this kind of music stories about Turkey. You know, Dr. always figure out that so he's Turkish. Obviously, I like it. Because most these days will be like, you should be a few years before you have to read immigration story. Because of first lady. My friends was cheap of stuff and then I said, you know, everything totally perfect. And many of them didn't complain because if you do a lot, you can do it. They do for a lot. I remember they donate and they buy from you in Australia and they never complain. Yeah, long time. I don't think he wants to I feel not so They're really good. You can't compare them. Steel, uranium, steel. Yeah. Yeah, they are also selling beer in US. Johnny is Turkish. When I search Johnny, I saw him. They use like that time también por
They did. How long you guys been sitting here?
15 minutes.
Why?
I was getting worried I was going to get
There's a lady, she asked me question.
Good afternoon. Quite a crowd we have today. Good to see so many people. I have one element at the top and then I will turn to your questions. The United States remains deeply concerned about Russia's military takeover and continued control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency must be given access to ZNPP as soon as possible and in a manner that respects Ukraine's full sovereignty to help ensure the safety and security of the plant and monitoring of its nuclear material. Brutality has been a hallmark of Russia's war against Ukraine, and the United States is aware of reports that Russian personnel have abused and coerced members of the ZNPP staff. We applaud the Ukrainian authorities and operators for their commitment to nuclear safety and security under the most trying of circumstances. The United States condemns, in the strongest terms, Russia's reckless disregard for nuclear safety and security. Along with our allies and partners, we call on Russia to cease all military operations at or near Ukraine's nuclear facilities and to return full control of the ZNPP to Ukraine. We continue to support the efforts of the International Atomic Energy Agency to fulfill its safeguards mandate and to assist Ukraine with nuclear safety and security measures across its nuclear facilities. With that, Matt.
Oh, that was
Brief, breezy.
briefer than I well, I wouldn't say breezy, but briefer than I thought it would be. Okay, thanks for that. Can we start with Israel? You have seen, no doubt, reports about the raids that were conducted on these NGOs and the closure of the offices, and I'm wondering what, if anything, you guys have to say about it, and what, if anything, you have to say about the review of the material that the Israelis gave to you last year about them being terrorist organizations.
Sure. We are concerned. We are concerned about the Israeli security forces' closure of the 6 offices of the Palestinian NGOs in and around Ramallah today. We have reached out to the Israeli government, including at senior levels, including here from Washington, as well as from our embassy in Jerusalem, for more information regarding the basis for these closures. And we'll continue to seek additional information and to convey our concern directly and privately to our Israeli partners. Our Israeli partners, in turn, have assured us that more information will be forthcoming regarding the basis for their actions. We, of course, have assured them that we will review that information on a timely basis and very carefully as well. We have, in the course of recent events, but also in recent months and beyond, made clear to our Israeli government partners and the Palestinian Authority as well the fact that independent civil society organizations in the West Bank and Israel must be able to continue their important work. Civil society is an integral element to thriving democracies the world over, and of course that applies here. To your specific question about our review of the material that has been provided to us to date from our Israeli partners, what I can say is that we have provided that information to our partners within the U.S. government. There are various departments and agencies who have taken a look at this material. What I can also say is that when it comes to reviewing information, whether that's intelligence information, whether that's open source information, we're always reviewing new material, which is why we've conveyed directly to the Israelis that any new information they provide, including the information they have pledged to provide regarding the basis for today's action, that would be something that we would review carefully, thoroughly, and immediately. As I think you know, Matt, through the course of our review of this information, we have not changed our position on or approach to these particular organizations. I should note that we designated the PFLP as a foreign terrorist organization in 1997, several decades ago. It is also a specially designated global terrorist group. It remains designated today. We have never funded any of these organizations, but again, we have not seen anything that has caused us to change our approach to or position on these organizations.
Okay, so does that mean that based on what you know now, pending the arrival of this new information that the Israelis say that they're going to give you, you do not see any basis for the raids and the closures that took place today?
Again, we have been promised additional information regarding
what you might learn in the future, because that's a hypothetical. I'm asking you about what you know now, and based on what you know now, was this action legitimate?
We have conveyed the message that there must be a very high bar to take action against civil society organizations. Our Israeli partners, in turn, have conveyed back to us that they have met that high bar. That is why we are going to carefully review the information that they have pledged to provide. We will form a conclusion on the basis of that information. We don't have that information yet. In the interim, to your question, that is why we've voiced our concern. We have voiced our concern publicly. We have also voiced our concern directly and privately to our Israeli partners.
Okay, but you got information about these groups from the Israelis a year ago, and you still haven't made a conclusion. So I'm sorry, it's just a little hard to believe
Well-
that all of a sudden new information is going to arrive and you're going to make it, when you haven't made one in a year on the previous information, that you're going to be able to say something or will say something, anytime soon.
So, Matt, a couple things. As I mentioned a moment ago.
It's in a perpetual state of limbo.
Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, Matt, we have seen nothing in recent months that has caused us to change our approach to or position on these particular organizations. But the other point is that when it comes to these matters, we are always reviewing new information that is in our possession, new information that our partners provide to us. That will certainly be the case with the information that our Israeli partners have pledged to provide in this case.
Okay, I guess this is kind of a futile line of inquiry. Let me just go.
Can I
Sure.
Side.
I mean, I don't want to belabor the issue or even beat the horse, because you guys received that information. As Matt said, on the 26th of October last year, it's been a long...
So, Said, let me clarify.
Just let me follow through on my question, okay? And you keep saying that, the Israeli government or the Israeli authorities met the bar, okay? Have they met the bar?
Said, what I said was our Israeli partners have conveyed to us their opinion that they have met that bar. As I said, we do not have the information yet in our possession that they have pledged to provide us. As soon as we receive that, we will begin reviewing it. We'll review it thoroughly. We'll review it carefully. I imagine we'll also provide it to other departments and agencies who have a stake in this. To your first point, our Israeli partners did provide us with information last year, but I do want to clarify, to underscore, that what has been promised to us today is additional information regarding the basis for their actions over the past 24 hours. So we will, of course, review that carefully, just as we have carefully reviewed the information they provided to us last year.
Okay, and Israel's record is clear and meeting this bar and being really true to what they say and their accusations, right? We have always had, we can look and review this record and find that Israel was always right in its assessment and so on, or its accusation, as far as you're concerned, right?
I'm not going to be categorical about anything like that, Said. What I will be categorical about is the fact that we will review what is provided to us and come to our own conclusion.
Yeah, but
What was the conclusion that you came to based on the previous information that was given to you last year?
Matt, I've said this now a couple times. We haven't changed our position on those organizations.
But what was your conclusion about the information that they did? Do you agree with them that these groups are terrorist organizations or connected to?
What happened last year is the Israeli government designated these organizations. We have not followed through with any designations, nor have we changed our approach to these organizations.
So why can't you just go and say that you don't accept the Israeli allegations?
We are going to continue. We are going to continue to review any information that's provided to us.
Have you gotten anything since October of last year and today?
We've been promised information today.
Yeah, but have you gotten anything since October and today that would make you? Apparently not.
As I just said, we have not changed our position on these organizations.
So you don't believe the Israelis' information?
This is information. Intelligence information is always information that is the subject of analysis, and different parties can read information differently, can perceive of threats differently. Our own analysis heretofore of the information that was provided last year has not caused us to change our approach to these organizations.
I was just wondering, you express your concern, but you don't go as far as to condemn it. If that had been any other country, you would probably condemn raids against civil society NGOs. So could you express why you're using that language of concern and not condemning?
Well, I think the fact is that our Israeli partners, as I mentioned a moment ago, they took an action last year to designate these organizations as so-called terrorist organizations. What we've seen publicly, what they have conveyed so far privately in recent hours, is that there is an appropriate basis for the actions that they have taken. It will be a matter of urgency for us to review the basis for that information. We have not received it yet. It was pledged just today. As soon as we do receive it, we'll begin reviewing that.
You give the Israelis a deadline. When do you expect to receive it and come up with it and conclude what the substance of
These conversations have taken place just within recent hours. So
just let me follow up just a little bit on this. You keep saying that you have designated the PFLP as a terrorist organization a very long time ago. Yet the connection between these groups and the PFLP is almost non-existent. It's so flimsy that your partners, your European partners, dismiss this altogether. So why do you keep repeating this? Why do you keep saying, as if, that's what they really say, that these guys were somehow, nobody knows what the connection is, but somehow were connected with the PFLP. You have no evidence, right? You have no evidence that these organizations have had any kind of connection, whether military or non-military or otherwise with the PFLP. Do you?
Saeed, it is a fact when it comes to the PFLP that we designated it several decades ago in 1997. I wasn't implying any explicit connection or denying any explicit connection between these 6 organizations and the PFLP. What we are going to do is take a very close look at any additional information that is provided to determine the nature of any links between whether it's the PFLP or any other organization we consider to be an FTO or an FTGT to these 6 organizations that Israel took action against today.
What is your sense? You said you were going to look at this with a sense of urgency. So another year before you even. I don't get it, because you had this information about these groups for a year. You can either reject it, which it sounds like you're doing, but you don't want to say that you don't believe it. Presumably because it's Israel, a partner that provided the information in the first place. But if that information was also reviewed with a sense of urgency, your definition of urgency seems to be a bit lacking.
We began review of that information as soon as we received it. In the case of that information, what I can tell you is that we immediately provided it to a number of our partners throughout the interagency, other departments and agencies who have an equity in this, who have an interest in this, and who have the wherewithal to help us understand the information that our Israeli partners provided in this case. Now, I don't want to delve into a hypothetical because, again, we haven't received the additional information that's been provided today, but I would imagine that we too will share that information with other departments and agencies. So even as we begin reviewing it on an immediate urgent basis, it is going to take some time for us to understand what I presume will be a complex set of issues, a set of facts.
On a technical point, you just said the information that's been provided today. So did they provide
the information that has been pledged
that they said
that is correct.
They said today they would provide to you, but they didn't say when they would provide it.
That is correct.
Relatedly, just I'm sure that you may have, or I'm sure that you've seen these reports. Apparently, the senior Israeli officials gave some kind of a background briefing in Israel to Israeli reporters, in which they said that Prime Minister Lapid has sent a letter to President Biden saying that the Iranian response to the EU text is not acceptable and that you can't. I want to ask you about, I know that you're not going to respond to unnamed officials, but the fact of the matter is that yesterday or the day before, you made a point of saying that countries that were not, quote unquote, were not filed the JCPOA the first time around had changed their tune. And this seems to just fly in the face of that, unless I'm just completely misreading the stories that are coming out of Jerusalem.
I don't know if you're misreading stories, but I think you're either misrecollecting what I said or misportraying what I said, because I did not say that every single country has, as a matter of government policy, changed its tune on the Iran deal. That is not what I said, and that would not be true.
You said that members, you said that countries that were not, quote unquote, wild about the nuclear deal in 2015, and then you specifically mentioned countries in the GCC, so the Gulf Arab states, and then you mentioned members of the security establishment establishment in Israel
That is correct.
had changed their tune.
That is correct.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the government of Israel has not changed.
But Matt, you just changed the subject of your sentence. You went from members of the security establishment to the government of Israel. I am.
The establishment in 2015. Some members of the Israeli security establishment in 2015 also were okay with the deal. But the elected government was not.
And I have not said anything about the position of the elected government, current or then, to the Iran deal. Their position on the Iran deal is quite clear. It is something that we all know quite well, and something of which we are quite frequently reminded. So, of course, our Israeli partners have not changed their official position on the Iran deal. The point I was making, and the point that you at least portrayed accurately in one instance here, is that members of the security establishment, individual members of the security establishment, including some who were not at least publicly in favor of the Iran deal in 2014, in 2015, have voiced support for it now.
I want to ask on the Iran issue, although I want to go back to the Palestinian issue at one point. But since we're on Iran, you told our colleague at Al-Hara today that you made it clear for Iran or to Iran in the past that releasing Americans is a priority. Does that mean that any signing of the deal is contingent upon the release of Americans beforehand?
It means that our approach to the Americans who were detained unjustly, wrongfully by the Iranian regime, our approach has not changed. The priority that we attach to their return as a matter of urgency has not changed. We have conveyed quite clearly to the Iranian regime over the course of 18 months now the priority we attach to this as a foreign policy goal of this administration.
So, but I still don't understand. You're saying that is it contingent upon the release? I mean, are they connected or is it one issue? Because I know that, when Iran, let's say, asked for something, you said you reject any extraneous demand and so on. Could this be like an extraneous demand that is not really at the crux of the Iran deal itself?
These are two separate issues, and we've been very clear that we have sought to maintain these as two separate issues, precisely because the Iran deal has always been a very uncertain, at times quite dubious proposition. It has always been a priority of ours to see these Americans, these dual nationals, released. We want that to be a certainty. So from our perspective, we have very intentionally not tied the fates of these Americans to what has always been an uncertain proposition. Anything else on the region before we move on? Peter? Yeah.
Asked about the Israeli issue. Axios has actually mentioned that it was the Israeli Prime Minister who sent a message to the White House saying that what they're working on, the text that they're working on goes beyond the red lines of the Biden administration, and that it should walk away. And we know next week the Israeli National Security Advisor is coming to Washington. And of course they've also mentioned again that they don't have to abide by the deal if it happens. If the deal happens, would that, apparently not, but would the Biden administration be able to convince the Israelis not to take any action because the nuclear program is being controlled by this agreement?
Well, to Matt's question, to Saeed's question, it is no question that we have tactical differences with our Israeli partners when it comes to this question, the JCPOA. There is also no question that when it comes to the strategic objective, the overarching objective, we see entirely eye to eye. We are aligned. We are aligned in the firm belief that Iran must never be allowed to acquire or possess a nuclear weapon. We happen to believe that diplomacy through centered around a potential mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA is the most effective means by which to accomplish that, the most effective means by which to once again see to it that Iran is subject to permanent and verifiable limits on its nuclear program, as well as to the most stringent verification and monitoring regime ever negotiated. If we are able to effect a mutual return to compliance with the Iran deal, Iran will not be in a position to acquire a nuclear weapon. It is not for me to speak to Israel's foreign policy, but we have heard from our Israeli partners, and when we've been together, this message has been echoed by both of our principals. We see eye to eye on this overarching priority of ensuring that Iran can never acquire a nuclear weapon.
Seems like today there was indirect communication between Tehran and Washington. The Iranian foreign minister called the Omani counterpart, and then the Omani foreign minister apparently called Special Envoy Mali. The topic, according to the Omani foreign ministry, was the implementation or the nuclear agreement. Can you add anything else to us for us? Has there been progress towards giving an answer to Iran's answer to the EU text?
So what I can say on that front is that our review of Iran's comments on the EU's proposal continues. We have continued to convey our feedback directly and privately to the EU, as has been requested. When it comes to Oman, I don't have any calls to confirm or to read out, but what I can say is that Oman has played an important role when it comes to discussions regarding a potential mutual return to compliance with the JCPOA, and has also played an important role when it comes to our efforts to see those Americans who are unjustly and wrongfully detained in Iran, to see them freed. We thank Oman for that role it's played. Yeah, anything else on the region? Yes, in the back.
When do you expect the review to finish?
Again, we have been conveying our feedback directly and privately to the EU. We're not going to negotiate in public. We'll do as requested with and through the EU.
This week, next week?
Because the Iranians, or somebody suggested that the Iranians actually placed a deadline that apparently passed last night on Wednesday. There is no such thing.
We will leave it to the EU to speak to the parameters.
So there is no deadline. The Iranians placed no deadline on their response.
We will leave it to the EU to speak to the parameters they've requested. Anything else on the region? Yes.
Follow up on two of the points you've been discussing. Number one, regarding the Iran deal. In that article that my colleague over here mentioned, there was a report that Prime Minister Lapid had conveyed to Ambassador Nides that he's concerned that the U.S. is not fully aware of the concessions that were proposed within the EU framework that was proposed. Did the U.S. see a full copy of the framework the EU was proposing before it was sent to the Iranians? And then on the issue of the NGOs in Israel, what is the bar for the U.S. to be able to say, what evidence would it have to see to be able to sort of agree with the Israelis' allegation that these NGOs were front groups for terrorism?
So on your first question, this part of that goes back to what has been the case for several months. And the EU proposal that the High Representative put on the table several weeks ago now was substantially based on the draft agreement that had been rather painstakingly negotiated between the parties, of course, with our indirect communication with Iran, but directly through our European allies and others, that had been essentially agreed upon since March. And so the EU proposal, as we've said, was substantially based on that March proposal. Of course, when the High Representative tabled what he has put forward as the best and final offer, we studied that proposal very carefully. We have conveyed, as I said just a moment ago, our feedback directly and privately to the EU on that initial draft, and in turn on the Iranian comments on that proposal. But again, that initial EU proposal was based substantially on the agreements that has been on the table since March, and that Iran has been in a position to accept since March if it had the political will to do so. When it comes to your question on Israel, look, I'm just not going to entertain a hypothetical. There is no question regarding the terrorist threat that Israel faces. We've all been reminded of that tragically and vividly, to include in recent days. Israel cites security concerns. Israel cites terrorist threats. We will be looking to the information that they provide to us as we form our own judgment regarding these organizations and recent actions. Anything else on the region? Syria, okay.
I've recently been in northeast Syria, so I just wanted to pick your brains about a few things there. On the 20th of January, ISIS carried out, as you know, its biggest attack since it lost all of its territory when it tried to break out thousands of its members from a prison in northeast Syria. And as you also know, hundreds of people were killed in the battles. On the 22nd of January, you said that ISIS had been planning this attack for a year. If you knew that ISIS had been planning to attack that prison for so long, why were thousands of men, some of them allegedly the most dangerous in the region or the world, why were so many men kept in a makeshift prison that was once a school, where it was overcrowded and clearly a security risk? And just to follow up from that as well, we know that there were hundreds of children that were being held in that prison, and we know that some of them were killed, yet nobody seems to have any figures. No one seems to be able to tell us how many of those children were killed. Do you know how many children were killed? And why did the United States, which leads the coalition,
the credibility?
Yeah, that's absolutely at the core of this. So the core of public access, and remember, this is not a right of media access, it is a right of public access, and the core of that right is the ability to monitor the functioning of the government, whether it is the government, the DOJ itself doing its job and its investigators, officers who executed the search warrant, the officers involved in gathering the materials that justified the search warrant, and of course the court, who's asked to look at whether the search warrant should remain under seal. Or, sorry, the search warrant application. The search warrant's already public.
Did the judge agree with this premise?
I don't think that there's any dispute that this is a case of extreme public interest. I don't think that the DOJ tried to argue otherwise, and of course I think Judge Reinhart recognizes that, you know, he's a very experienced judge, so I think he very quickly recognizes the significance of this investigation in particular. Yep.
Just to make sure we understand about what was released today. Mm-hmm. It was just
the motion to seal the search warrant.
Motion to seal it.
But you remember you have the search warrant.
Yeah, we already have it.
Yeah, so now that's why you're getting it, right?
Yeah.
So the motion to seal that search warrant is what justified putting it under seal in the first place. And so that motion's coming out, and so is the order on that motion. There's no point in keeping them under seal anymore because you have the warrant.
Right. The motion to seal, was that filed like?
Those are dockets 1, 2, and 3 on the, if you look on Pacer. They're going to be under seal on Pacer as 1, 2, 3. Okay. If you go to 57, that's what should come out. So that 57 is currently designated as a sealed docket when we went into court, but the court instructed the clerk to unseal docket 57.
Okay, so that was the motion to say, hey, don't put out the search warrant, even though it ended up being released.
Yeah, because it was filed before.
Yeah,
yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's just a little housekeeping. If you have the warrant, you might as well have the motion that sealed it.
Right, got it. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
What is that criminal cover sheet exactly? Because it's 3 documents, so the motions to seal, the seal motion, and then what is that?
A criminal cover sheet is really actually, a very benign document. It basically has a checklist of what type of proceeding this is, who the parties are, what the relief is that's requested. It's usually a 1-page document that you check particular boxes for what's important, what kind of proceeding you're opening. Because to get that search warrant, they had to open a proceeding to ask the court to execute and sign off on the search warrant. So that's just the cover sheet. Nothing major.
Your feel is that the judge really wants to get something out. He mentioned the fact that it was a public interest, and I mean, the media has argued that it's a historic event.
Yeah. The judge already said he's not inclined to seal the entirety of the search warrant application and its affidavit. So I think we will get something out of this proceeding. It remains to be seen how much. Whether we get a big black page or we get something of substance.
Is the DOJ willing then to work with that? Because they were a little concerned about how much they were able to unseal.
Yeah, the DOJ's position in its papers and in court today was that the entirety of the search warrant application and its affidavit should remain under seal. So, they will have a week now to sort of negotiate that. And perhaps, given Judge Reinhart's comments on the record today, they will temper their request for redactions. But they may continue to assert that the entirety of it should remain under seal.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Being like a historic event, the FBI going to the former president, what does that mean for the future? What do you think? Does this create like a ripple effect, per se?
No, I don't necessarily think so. I mean, I think it's easy to get lost in the high-profile nature of this particular search warrant. But keep in mind, the Southern District of Florida will enter and execute dozens of these and hundreds by the end of any given year, or maybe even more. So this particular search warrant application is not getting any different or special treatment than any other would under the law. It is not routine for the public because it's very, scandalous in the sense that it involves a former president, but it's very routine for the criminal justice system to apply for, receive, and execute on search warrants.
What do you think the biggest impact potentially of the process of how they got more coming out?
I think it's about government accountability. It's about, allowing the public to assess for itself whether the government overstepped, overstated, stayed within the lines. At the end of the day, this exercise is so that all of us have a right to understand whether the government has overstepped or stayed within the bounds of the law in seeking this search warrant. And that's good for everybody.
All right, understood.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Yep.
So you have a good day.
Thanks. All right. Bye, guys.
Army of China is participating in the Eastern Army exercise in Russia. There are reports that North Korea and China will conduct joint military tactical exercises. These three countries are ignoring U.S. diplomatic efforts and having strong military ties. In this regard, what kind of readiness do the U.S. and ROK, Japan, our allies have?
What kind of readiness?
Yes.
So on your first question, if you're referring to the exercises that are taking place in Russia, this is something that we discussed yesterday. These are exercises that involve a number of countries, not only the countries that you mentioned, but a number of countries, including some partners with whom we regularly conduct our own exercises. So as far as these broader exercises are concerned, we don't read much into the specific participation of individual countries. What I can say more broadly, however, is that there are a number of challenges to the security environment in the Indo-Pacific, including in North Asia. There is perhaps no greater challenge to peace and security in that region, than that posed by the DPRK. And in the face of the DPRK's provocations, including its multiple ballistic missile launches, including its ICBM tests and launches in recent months, we have taken action with our treaty allies, Japan and the ROK, to ensure readiness, to ensure appropriate deterrence against the threat that we collectively face from the DPRK. Now, again, our preferred approach is one of dialogue and diplomacy. We seek to take part in dialogue, direct dialogue with the DPRK as a means by which to advance our shared objective of the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But in the absence of the DPRK's willingness to do so, and in the presence of the DPRK's continued provocations, including those provocations that create a much more unstable environment, we'll continue to coordinate closely with Japan, with the ROK, and to take appropriate steps when it comes to their security and our collective deterrence.
Do you think the U.S. and ROK joint military exercise is necessary for extended deterrence?
So these exercises, and I will leave it largely to the DoD to speak to these exercises, but these exercises are purely defensive in nature. These exercises, as are all of our military exercises with the ROK and our allies and partners around the world, are intended to see to it that together we're able to defend our collective interests, our shared interests, including from any potential threats or provocations from the DPRK. But these are purely defensive in nature. Thanks. On Russia, sorry, what? Okay, let's stay on Russia and then we'll.
Russia, Ukraine. So
Sure.
there's a report that the Ukrainians believe that Russia is laying groundwork for a false flag operation on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant tomorrow. Does the U.S. have any reason to believe that they are making plans for that?
I'm not in the position to speak to what Russia may or may not be planning, but these types of statements, including some of what we've heard from Russian officials, are cause for concern. They're cause for concern because they fit squarely within the Russian playbook. Accuse others of what it is you have done or what it is you intend to do. We have seen both before February 24th, before the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also since, that Russia has engaged in a number of false flag operations. And typically what they have done, and what they have done over the years now, going back for quite some time, is to level statements along these lines to accuse others of planning or conducting the types of operations that they have either undertaken or plan to undertake. So again, it's something we're watching very closely when it comes to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We, just at the top of this briefing, reiterated our desire to see IAEA access consistent with Ukraine's sovereignty. And just today, we heard President Zelensky invite IAEA inspectors onto Ukrainian territory to be present at or near the nuclear power plant. And we reiterated our calls for a demilitarized zone in and around the ZNPP because Russia's continued conduct of operations, its continued pursuit of military objectives in and around a nuclear power plant, that's the height of irresponsibility.
But in the past, you guys have been very explicit when you have information that would lead you to believe that Russia's planning a false flag operation. So are you changing your policy of revealing that information, or do you have less visibility?
We haven't changed our policy, and what I can say, and you just alluded to, there have been a number of occasions where we have previewed our concerns regarding specific false flag operations. There have been times where we have had information in our possession regarding a potential false flag operation that, for whatever reason, we weren't in a position to speak to publicly. So I wouldn't read much into our posture regarding any specific planning or potential planning or lack thereof, but it is something, just hearing, that gives us concern.
And just one quick follow-up while we're on Russia and nuclear issues. Is there any reason to believe that New START could be in jeopardy at this moment in time?
Again, we see the value of New START. It is as valuable to us today, in some ways even more so, than it has been in the course of its existence. We want to see the important parameters of New START continue to be implemented. As you heard from President Biden on the occasion of the start of the NPT review conference on August 1st. We are prepared, if Russia is willing to engage as a responsible nuclear power, to begin negotiating a new framework once New START expires in the coming years.
So, but you didn't say if you believe it's in jeopardy or not. Is it on solid ground right now? You feel good about the treaty?
Well, obviously, there are two primary parties to New START, the United States and Russia. Even during times of conflict, this conflict, we've been so far in a position to pursue the shared goals as spelled out under New START, the important goals when it comes to transparency and arms reduction. Again, goals that are just as important now as they were when New START came into existence. So if it is up to us, and we are going to continue to do everything we can to bolster New START and to see its key provisions preserved. Yes.
Thank you. Two questions. The first question is the following. Today's EU-led dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo again reached a stalemate. Can you give us a sense of where things stand from the U.S. perspective, given that Mr. Escobar, officials from the State Department, was in Brussels today? Can you tell us more? And then I will have a follow-up.
Sure. Do you want to ask your follow-up, and I'll take both?
After.
Okay. So yes, you are correct that that Gabe Escobar, Deputy Assistant Secretary Escobar, is in Brussels. He is there as an observer. He is not there as a participant. So we will let the participants to these discussions speak in detail to their progress. Our understanding is that talks are ongoing. We, in partnership with the EU, are watching very carefully. We encourage both sides to use the dialogue effectively, and we urge the parties to remain at the negotiating table. As I said yesterday or the day before, we fully support this dialogue. We believe that it's important that both parties use these talks effectively to advance their discussion on normalized relations centered on the premise of mutual recognition. We would like to see progress made on implementation of past dialogue agreements, and we believe that, as a broad principle, dialogue and compromise are critical components of governance, including in the case of Kosovo and Serbia. Far from seeing compromise as a symptom or a reflection of weakness, we believe that it is essential to reach an agreement on the normalization of relations, which remains fundamental to both countries' aspirations for EU membership. We're hopeful that the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo understand the importance of moving forward, not backward, through this very EU-facilitated dialogue.
So my follow-up question, I was told that the American ambassador to the EU that he gave a message from someone from the White House to the EU during the talks today.